I offer these words and the meditation of my heart in the name of God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Good morning. As we begin our conversation this morning, I want to invite you to ponder a photograph with me. And as we spend a few moments with it, I invite you to allow words to come to your heart that you would use to describe the image that you will see. What are the emotions that you see? What are the characteristics of this amazing woman that have been revealed in this photograph? And then what is the essence of God? What is God's reality that you see in her eyes or her heart or her stance? So let's look at this together for just a moment. This image, of course, is of Joan Applegate, a beloved friend of so many of us, and whose life we celebrated last year, and whose presence still clings to our very soul of our parish in so very many ways, and particularly in the beautiful music that is created from her piano. When we look at this photograph, what is unique about it and why it, I think, has been resonating on my heart all week long is that it's actually unusual. We so rarely take photographs of those loved ones as they near death. And this photograph was taken maybe just a few days before she died. Joan had moved into one of the facilities at Minnow Haven. And after we got her settled and she was sitting there, one of her children snapped this photograph and caught the essence, I think, of Joan. Because when I look at that, I see her strength, and I see her courage, and I see her beauty, and I see her love. All of that revealed in that stance as she looked over, as one of her children said at her service, as she looked at the sun setting, both literally and figuratively, on her life. When she could see in her view Wilson College that had been such a big part of her life, and could imagine the place where her husband had died. We are blessed by this photograph, and blessed that we have before us an example of how images that we can capture can actually reveal more than what we see, that they can be lenses into the holy that can be within our own hearts and souls and can be revealed in our life. I think very often the photographs that we take are certainly true to us, and they can mark the milestones in our lives, and they can help us project the image, and maybe it is our reality, that we are successful per the world's standards. And we certainly saw those wonderful and marvelous photographs at Joan's memorial service of the joy of her wedding day and the gift of her children and her grandchildren. And I have boxes full of photographs of my young boys filled with these milestone moments when they're all dressed up in their beautiful outfits, or when Andrew's heading off at 4 for his first piano recital, or Philip is there with his swimming medals. I mean, we have all of those when everything looks wonderful and successful and all is well. And I treasure every single one of them. But the ones that grab my heart are the ones that speak. They're the spontaneous ones, the ones that speak of the real essence of my children. Those silly faces that they would make, or their interactions with their grandpa or with Diana, their cousin. The ones that really capture who they were in that moment and how they were being formed as good and holy and righteous people because God was poking through in that spontaneity and the emotions that happen. And you might be wondering, why in the world am I talking about images and imagining this contrast between images that show and reveal the truth of God and images that reveal the truth that we want to project sometime, or the truth of the world, that obviously we are a part of. And that is because we're looking at this parable of the wheat and the weeds. And the parable to me is a rather strange one. As we all know, parables need to be. There's a lot of things that are strange about it. We wonder why the servants are are shrieking and surprised at their weeds. Well, I just need to look over here in my garden and I see a ton of weeds. So I know as a gardener, as a home gardener, there's always going to be weeds. And we wonder why in the world they asked the owner if he had planted good seed, because they're the ones who would have planted the seed. So there are a lot of odd things about this that we could really walk down into, in some real kind of bunny holes. And like one thing that's really fascinating to me is this parable gives the idea that this force of evil is a creative power. It's not just something that's lurking around and occasionally will kind of come near us, but that the force of evil is actually something that can create, that has planted the seeds intentionally. I mean, that's a pretty remarkable thing, and that's not always our image of how evil works in the world. And so we could certainly explore that. And we could kind of go offline a little bit and think about, well, maybe we're the weeds. Maybe the weeds are actually the righteous people. And that we are being sent out into a world that does not have righteousness as a main part of it, of its essence. And we are here to choke the fruit, the bad fruit of an oppressive society. I mean, you have to think that Jesus was teaching and preaching in the middle of the Roman oppression. And so he might have been sending his disciples out to rip away the harvest, to use up resources that aren't going to give life then to the destruction and the abuse and the power and the status and all those things that the Roman Empire was all about. So that's something that we can explore in depth some other time. But I think what is most probably a more traditional and perhaps more fruitful way to look at this parable is to examine this wheat and the weeds. And we learn from this parable that they are actually to grow up next to one another. That the advice is not to rip out the weeds. Now, I find that startling because I know if I didn't pull out the thistles over there, I would end up with a bed of thistles, and I'd have a few little marigolds being choked to death, trying to actually find enough resources to live. So it's actually really shocking that the message seems to be that God is saying no wheat and weeds grow up alongside one another. And that means we're going to rub shoulders with that which is not of God. And there can be actually a wonderful challenge in that. It can encourage us to speak our truth or speak God's truth ever more loudly. To know that whatever we proclaim about the truth and the love and the grace and the joy and the beauty of God, there's going to be some force around us that's going to negate that. And so our voice has to become strong, and we have to develop the wheat in this world so that we can continue to flourish and push back against that which is not of God. Of course, this can also talk to us about how we as individuals may have both wheat and weeds within us. We may have that beautiful and truthful part of God inside of us. Well, I know we do. But we can have that peace within us and have that loud and clear. And we can also have another part that seems to have bought into the world's values a bit more. That we are about our own gain or our own financial status rather than caring for the others. I know I say this every week, but we always have to put these parables in the context of the Sermon on the Mount, because all of this follows that centerpiece of Matthew's Gospel, who says, where he says, blessed are the poor, blessed are the oppressed, blessed are the meek, blessed are those who weep. And so we need to understand that part of our work is to rip out, or to allow, not to rip out, but to allow those parts of us that aren't true of God to be shown into the light of Christ so they can be made whole and new. Like, I look at this tomato. I know I posted on Facebook this week that I have 7-foot tall tomato plants, which is remarkable to me. And so I was looking at the fruit the other day, marveling at this all. And I look at this, and then I look at the other side and see what I see. I have a blight And so it's something to remember, that something that looks perfect or isn't yet formed but is almost perfect and just needed to ripen actually also contains something that is stunting its growth. And so I'm going to go off to the fungicide store and I'm going to buy some fungicide, as Edna keeps talking to me about, because I don't want to do this. I want to bear fruit. And so just because we're not to judge and just because we're not to pull out or yank out the weeds does not mean that we are not to be attentive. It means that we can distinguish between faithful and sinful behavior, and we can be responsible for ourselves for being as faithful as we possibly can. It does mean that we can teach our children and our grandchildren the difference between right and wrong. It can mean that we can stay focused on mission and Christ's mission and being true in the world. And if there are people in our parish or in our community or in the world who don't value those things, then that's okay. We can stay true and strong and real as we continue that work with God. The other piece that I find really interesting about not ripping out the weeds, which seems to be everybody's natural instinct, is something very promising and actually really hopeful. I think it says to me that God sees possibilities in all things, that even the broken, the blighted, the diseased, the destructive parts that are within us are precious to God. That God always sees the possibility for transformation. God always sees that we can strengthen the good parts so that we can hold and ultimately dismantle that which is not, to bring our lives into the fullness that God desires for us. And so I find that actually really encouraging and opening. That there is nothing that is outside of God's reach. That all parts of us are precious to God. And God can imagine new life within us. And that is the promise that is made true and real to us in the resurrection of Christ. So when I'm thinking about the images, I've thought an awful lot about images because over the last 4 months, as I have been creating these online services, once I figured out the technology of how to actually do any of this, I've been trying to be intentional about the images that I bring forward, because I want you to engage in this worship and not just watch it. And so I know the power of images, and I think there are images that can draw us all to the best of who we are. I think there are images that can remind us, like the images of the sunlight pouring through the altar window, that can remind us of the beauty and the grace and the joy and the sense of communion that we have had, and yet we have to believe will be there again for us. But I want us to think about our own images, or what we are how we are representing ourselves in the world by the words that we say, by the actions that we take, by the images that we are posting on Facebook, whatever it is. Are they revealing God? Or are they revealing the weed part of our world? How can we look for the holy within each moment? How can we, instead of taking a picture, as one of my spiritual mentors will say, how do we receive an image? Because if we receive an image, we're receiving it into our soul. So the next time you take a picture or you ask to take someone else's picture, I invite you to look for the soul part. I know a photographer who is excellent in doing this, that she will take all of the images that you would expect, the milestone images and pictures that seem like the world is yearning for, but you'll always find that little kernel of truth, the soul part. So as we talk about the wheat and the weeds, as we talk about that which is revealing of God and that which is not, let us do our part as we imagine a world together with God where we can grow and flourish, and the seeds can scatter to the ends of the earth. May we be like Joan. May we, in our eyes and our heart and our stance, may we reveal beauty and strength and joy and peace. May we allow our lives to reveal that which is true about God. May we open ourselves to the gift that we can offer to the world. I ask all this in the name of God. Amen.